Hello, welcome to my channel. I'm Ronald, and today we are not reading a book. Today I am talking about all of the books that I've read for the first half of the year because we're halfway through the year now, and I want to talk about what I've read so far this year and give my thoughts on it. Some of these books y'all have seen on my channel before, some y'all haven't. So let's get started. I got my story graph pulled up. Honestly, a lot of these books, the ones that I've covered videos on, I'm going to tell y'all to go watch the videos because that's going to have more of my full thoughts on what I thought about the book. So the first book I read this year was Falcon 7. Just to give an overview, this was the worst book that I've read this year so far. I gave it a 3. I didn't like the way it was written. I didn't like the protagonist. I call him Jack John. His name is John Caskey, but a lot of people call him Jack, and the book kept going back and forth between what he was called. So I call him Jack John. I did not like him. He was the dumbest character in this book, but the book wanted us to believe he was the smartest. He didn't affect the plot. The plot just moved around so that he could do what he needed to do. He didn't have no challenges in the story, and that's what got on my nerves the most. The fact that he was the dumbest character in this book, but they wanted us to believe that he was the smartest, and the fact that the plot would literally shift and move so that he would never be wrong. It was the worst book I've read, but I have read that this is considered to be one of the author's worst books. Even by his fans, they consider it to be one of his worst books for the same reasons that I hated it. And if you want to know the full reasons I hated it, go watch my video. His fans said this was one of his more disappointing works. It's not one of his best. So I am willing to give him one more chance. And so the next 3 books that I read in January were God Don't Like Ugly, God Still Don't Like Ugly, and God Don't Play. I'm going to put a pin in those books because I'm going to come back to them later. So then we get to February, where I read 7 books by Black authors because it was Black History Month. It wasn't a challenge, it wasn't no channel thing. It was Black History Month and I wanted to support Black authors, so that's what I did. The first 2 books that I read in February were Cheaters and Liar's Game by Eric Jerome Dickey. I gave them both 4s. If I had to pick between them two which one I like better, it would definitely be Cheaters. I really enjoyed those characters. I really enjoyed Stefan and Shantae. It was fun, it was entertaining. I'm still pissed off at Darnell and Tammy for what they did to Dawn, but it is what it is. If y'all want to know what they did, go watch my video. And so then the other book, I gave it a 4 too. I liked it, but I didn't like it as much as Cheaters. It just felt like too dramatic, like too much was going on. But it was still enjoyable, it was still good. And my mom told me I was talking entirely too fast in that video, and the reason why is because if you watch both videos, y'all know I recorded them on the same day. It took about 2-3 hours to do the Cheaters video, and by the time I got to Liar's Game, it was 9 at night and I was ready to be done. So I was like, you know what, you get an hour to record this whole video, and that's why I was talking so fast. So then the next book I read was Beloved. That is probably my favorite book that I've read so far this year. I just loved it. It was great, and I say this and I'll say it again. Toni Morrison makes me feel like I cannot write. Obviously y'all can see that I seriously write. I consider myself to be a pretty good writer, but Toni Morrison made me feel like I cannot write at all because that's just how good her writing is, and I really just enjoyed Beloved. I enjoyed the movie too. The video I did is covering both the book and the movie. In that video, I say that you kind of need the book to understand what's going on in the movie. I did, for the most part, enjoy reading Beloved. It was great. It was amazing. The next book I read was Minion, which was the book swap that me and Tati did for February. Minion was her turn to choose. I enjoyed Minion. I gave it a 3.75. That's all I'm gonna say on it because I want y'all to go watch that video because y'all need to watch that video to get the full understanding and the full experience of what went on reading that book. Then the next book I read was Devil in a Blue Dress by Walter Mosley. That was a 5-star book to me. I enjoyed reading about E.T. Rollins, and I'm still pissed off that we got only 1 movie. The first movie was not a box office success, and so that's why we didn't get a franchise even though the studio licensed the rights for the first 3 books. I'm pissed because I said it in the video and I'll say it again. E.T. Rollins should have been as big as Philip Marlowe. We just got a Philip Marlowe movie recently. E.T. Rollins should have been as big as him. He was successful book-wise, but his movie franchise, it should have been just as good. I enjoyed the book. I liked the book. I enjoyed Easy. Easy was super relatable. He was fun. He was funny. He made some dumb decisions sometimes, but I gave him some slack because it was his first case and he wasn't a professional PI yet. But it was an enjoyable book. The next book I read was Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. I love this book. I gave it a 5. It was an enjoyable read, but it was a very heavy read. That and Beloved, reading them together, it was very heavy. It was just good. That's all I can say about it. I gave it a 5. I enjoyed the adaptation too, the television adaptation. I wish somebody would pick it up so we can get the second season and get the rest of the adaptation. And then maybe in the future we can get a more faithful adaptation to the book. And then the next book I read was A Gathering of Old Men by Ernest J. Gaines. This technically I finished in March, but it goes with this group of February books. And I gave this a 5. I enjoyed it. And Tati said this in our book club meeting. I was already thinking it before she said it, so Tati, if you're watching this, I didn't steal it from you. Because I read this comment on this forum, and it said that Toni Morrison, her books, they like spoke to the hearts of black women. I've been on a quest to find the black man equivalent of like books written by a black man that speak to the heart of black men, and I feel like Ernest J. Gaines is kind of like that in a sense, because I've only read 2 books by him so far, and both of those books I've enjoyed. I've related to them so much. They have definitely spoke to like my heart and my experience, not only as a black man, but as a black man living in the South. I could either see myself in situations like that, or I've experienced situations, or I've known people who've experienced situations like that in the book. So then we get into the books I read in March. So the first book I read was a book club book. Me and Tati were in a book club separate from Book Swap. So this is a book club book, and this is a book that one of the members chose. It's called Siri Who Am I by Sam Cheetah. I hated this book. But it's not the worst book I read this year. That's Falcon 7. I gave it a 3. And all 3 stars are for the protagonist, Mia. Today is March 7th. I just finished Siri Who Am I. It wasn't really something I would usually read, but I read it as part of a book club, and so that's why I read it. The main character, Mia, was really the only interesting part of the book. Outside of wanting to find out what happened to her and what happened to her memory, I didn't care about nothing else going on in this book. I didn't care about Crystal, I didn't care about Max, I didn't care about JP. The only thing I cared about was Mia and her memory. I just want to say that I was right, and I basically predicted the whole book and what was gonna happen. The only thing that irritated me in this book was Max, the black guy. I'm like, okay, Max, we get it. You're black. We get it. You're a science nerd. We get it. You're not like other black guys. I'm like, Max, please say something else. Say something different! Say something else, because we're tired. We, the audience, are tired. We, the black guys reading this book, are tired. It's okay to be black, Max. It's okay to be a nerd. And it's okay to not like hip-hop. Nobody is mad at you for that. But for you to be sitting up here talking about oh, I'm not like other black guys. We get it, Max. You're not like other black guys. Set yourself free. Find a personality outside of that, please. We're tired. This book is going straight to the thrift store. I'm done with it. And once we have that final book club meeting, this is going straight to the thrift store, because what do I need this book for? I'm not going to read it again. I didn't even want to read it the first time, really.
A pretty face that ruins my life and adds nothing to it. A man who is plus size, who loves me with all his heart, who will give me the world. Which one are we gonna take?
I have one burrito.
Which one?
I have one burrito. A billionaire or a broke neuroscientist.
Oh, you know! Oh my God! You know how I felt about that. I'm like, either broke college student, billionaire boyfriend, pretty face that's gonna ruin my life, and that's what kills me, or a plus size dude that's gonna give me the world. Why are we making these decisions?
If it was not for Mia, this book would have got a 0. Because Mia is an interesting protagonist. She's interesting enough to keep me interested, to want to know what happened to her. Her personality is interesting. If it didn't have nothing to do with Mia, I just didn't care. The book club member who chose this book, she thought it was going to be like a thriller. It wasn't that at all. It was a lighthearted comedy read about this girl who lost her memory. Along the way, she's finding stuff out about herself that she doesn't like, and so she's like, okay, I gotta make a change. It was just a cute little lighthearted, fluffy read, but I did not like it. Mia was the only interesting part of the book. Max, and I will say this, Max, I'll give it to Sam Cheetah. She definitely talked to somebody black to write Max, because the way Max was talking, the way he was rating, it was realistic to how some black people sound. It was. I could see she consulted somebody, but that didn't stop him from getting on my nerves. He was doing too much. He was being jealous over Mia. I'm like, you've only known her for 2 days. Why are you doing all this? Overall, I didn't really like the book. I gave it 3 stars. All 3 stars are for Mia, the protagonist. The next book I read was Barbecue, Bourbon, and Bullets, which is this very short, cozy mystery. It's about this girl named Allie Daniels. She runs a bakery, It's like this honeycomb shaped bakery in New York. The author is black, but I don't know if the characters are black, but I'm assuming they're black because this was in the African American mystery section, and I've had this book since like 2017 on my Kindle. And this is the second book in a series of mysteries, but each mystery is like its own standalone mystery. You don't really need to read the books in order. There's an overarching storyline, but you don't really need to read the previous books to get an understanding of what's going on, because like they give you enough details in the book to kind of piece it together. So this is the second book in the series, and so this is the second time Allie and this detective have worked together on this mystery. What happens is they go on this friendship date, and they go to this barbecue place, but a murder happens at the barbecue place, and they end up having to solve it because he's a detective and she's worked with him before on a previous case, which is, I'm assuming, was the first book where they met. But you get enough details to not need to go read the first book, because I wasn't going to go read the first book anyway because it's not free. This book was free, that's why I got it. I enjoyed it. It was fun to read. It was cute. It was quick. It was 6 chapters long. I gave it a 4. So the next book I read was Waiting to Exhale, which was the March book swap between me and Tati. It was my turn. I chose it because we had to read it, because we needed to solve the mystery of whether men cry in the dark. Was a good male equivalent to Waiting to Exhale. And in that video I said I could kind of see it as far as subject material, but it wasn't a good male equivalent to Waiting to Exhale. But I did enjoy Waiting to Exhale. I gave it a 4. That was a 4-part video. I suggest y'all go watch all of it. We covered the book, we covered the movie, we covered whether Men Cry in the Dark and Waiting to Exhale go well together. We cover all of that. I had my sister in the video too. She gave her thoughts and opinions on Waiting to Exhale and Men Cry in the Dark. The best way that I can explain why it was enjoyable is because, like, since we talked about both the book and the movie is like yo auntie's version of events. She at the family reunion, she's telling her side of the story, and the movie is her side of the story. The book is the actual story. That's the version where like you get all the details, including the ones that your auntie conveniently left out to make herself look better. That's what the book is, and the book is great. And the last book I read in March was The Scarlet Letter. I gave it a 4. I didn't expect to enjoy it as much as I did, but I did enjoy it. I read it because I found my old high school essay that I did over the book, and I had not read the book when I wrote that essay, so I read that essay prepared to laugh. But a lot of that essay was actually kind of relevant to what's going on right now as far as like the book community and stuff like that. I enjoyed reading The Scarlet Letter. I watched all of the like film and television adaptations I could find of The Scarlet Letter, so I gave my thoughts on all of those. Some were good, some not so much. It had one of my legendary rants in there as far as one of the movies, so go check it out. So then we get to April. I read 2 books in April. The first one was The Itch by Benilde Little. That was Tati's book swap pick of the month for April. I gave it a 4. It was a good book. The video is on the way. It's not out yet as of this video, so I'm not going to say too much about it because I want y'all to go watch the video when it comes out. But what I am going to say is that y'all know how sometimes black men, when it's a book by black women, they make the argument that the black men in the story are portrayed terribly. Yeah, I hate to say it, but I'm going to have to be one of those men with this book. All of the black men in this book were portrayed terribly. It was one man who was kind of redeemable, like a little bit, but the way he went about things, it's kind of questionable whether he could be redeemable or not, in a sense of was he a good representation of a black man. But I still enjoyed the book. I gave it a 4. Y'all check out the video when it comes out. And the other book I read in April was Rebecca. I gave this book a 3.5, but it was a really good psychological thriller, so I am kind of considering possibly giving it a 4-star rating, because the more I sit and think about it, the more I'm like, it was actually a really good book. The reason I gave it a 3.5 was because Lady was getting on my nerves. As I was doing like the editing for the video and like watching the movies and stuff, I realized that the more Lady gets on my nerves, the more the book works. The story doesn't work if Lady's not getting on your nerves. So that's why I'm considering moving it up to a 4. But I don't know. I guess y'all will find out in the future whether I give it a 4 or not. But go check out my video on Rebecca. That was a very interesting and long time read. And so then in the month of May, I read Dauntless by Jack Campbell. That is the first book in the Lost Fleet series. I'm not going to say too much on that because I do have a video on the Lost Fleet series coming out eventually, so I'm not going to say too much on it, but I just know I enjoyed the book. I gave it a 5. We had another Jack John, but this Jack John was so much more interesting, so much cooler. I liked him so much better than Falcon Seven's Jack John. The next book was Slice of Cherry by Dia Reeves. This was another book club book pick. This time it was Tati's turn to pick the book, and she chose this, and I gave it a 4. When I first started reading it, I was like, what did this girl got us reading? Because this is kind of like a, it's kind of like a horror type of book, apparently Tati really likes horror. It's black horror too. It was an interesting read. I did give it a 4. Once I got into reading it, it was a good little read. The protagonist, Fancy, she was getting on my nerves. She's supposed to get on your nerves because the story wants her to get on your nerves. She's like in her teen years, like getting close to adulthood, but she don't want to grow up. So she's experiencing all these changes, but she don't want to experience all these changes. And so like she's unpleasant because she don't want to experience all these changes. So she's supposed to get on your nerves because she's experiencing all this change, but she don't want to. And another thing is, I was reading this book at the same time I was reading Rebecca. And so like you got Lady over here getting on my nerves because she being a pick-me, and you got Fancy over here getting on my nerves because she don't want to accept change. So it's like when you going back and forth between books and both protagonists getting on your nerves, that's going to affect your reading experience with both books. Let's just be real. They were both good books. So that's another reason why I'm considering giving Rebecca a 4. The next book I read was Ready Player One by Ernest Cline. Yeah. So today is May 2nd. I'm not doing a read with Ronald over this book. I just need to talk about it real quick because the whole reason I'm reading it is because one of my best friends had the nerve to come talking out the side of his neck. The reason I'm reading Ready Player One is because I bought it to give to him as a gift, because he has Ready Player 2, but he doesn't have Ready Player One. He checked Ready Player One out of the library, but he has Ready Player 2, he owns it. So I was, looking for some books to buy, and I had like a buy this many books, get one free type of deal going on. So I decided to get Ready Player One to, give to him as a gift, because I ain't seen him in a minute. I'm like, before we give it to him, I want to read it, so that way when I give it to him, I could tell him that the book was not something that I would have liked to read. Because I told him when I saw Ready Player 2, I told him I heard that book is not a good book. He's like, oh, you don't know what good literature is. And I'm like, okay, sir, no. See, what you're not about to do is play me like I don't know what a good book is and what a good book is not. Especially when I done wrote 5 good books. No, sir. Nah, bruh. Nah. So now I gotta read this whole book so that I can prove my point. I already proved it once before with Fahrenheit 451 when I told him that book was terrible. He's like, no, it wasn't, because he had it. So I took it from him, read it in 2 days, gave it back, and said this book is terrible. So now I gotta do this mess again with Ready Player One. But yeah, I just had to come up here and rant because I have been stuck on chapter 1 for like 2 weeks. I hate the writing style so badly because it is just, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. That is not how you write a book. That is not the best way to write a book. I don't know why authors want to go with the and this happened, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened method, because that method is not good. It's irritating to read. I don't want an itemized list of your day. I want you to tell me the story. But we'll see how this book goes. I might read Ready Player 2 too, just to hammer the point into his head that these books were not good. But we'll see. Hey, y'all can call me a hater if you want. Oh well. So today is May 8th. I am still reading Ready Player One. I know I said I was gonna give this book a week, and that's still true. It's just gonna be this week because I chose to do better things to my life last week than read through this book. But I'm gonna go ahead and read this book this week. This book is irritating because it's the epitome of that nerd boy who's like, you tell them, oh, I like this book, or I like this movie, or I like this band. They start quizzing you on it and start wanting to see like how much you know to test if you're truly a fan. Like, that is the epitome of this book. I hate the writing style because it's just, and this happened, and this happened, and this happened. And then it's a whole bunch of explanations about 80s pop culture. But like the way it's done is like, it's more like a tutorial, like kind of like a game manual. This is what this is, and this is how this works, instead of like integrating it into the story in a way that's fun. He did a whole explanation of what a Rubik's Cube is. I'm like, who don't know what a Rubik's Cube is? Come on now. The Oasis is set up like a Rubik's Cube, and he goes into this detailed description of the Rubik's Cube and how it's like an 80s toy and all this other type of stuff. And I'm like, who don't know what a Rubik's Cube is? All you had to say was that the Oasis is built to emulate a Rubik's Cube. Everybody would have understood. I'm not enjoying this book. And I also found out that the movie was directed by Steven Spielberg, and that's probably why I like the movie so much, because it was put in the hands of a capable person who could make it work and make it interesting and fun. Like the movie, I enjoyed the movie, but this book is just, I don't like this book. I don't like the writing. The main character is annoying. He's one of those annoying nerd boys who has all the knowledge in the world of 80s pop culture, is not like other boys. If you express any type of knowledge about being a gunter, he's gonna be like, oh, well, do you know this? Do you know that? You don't know this, you don't know that, so you can't call yourself a real gunter. You are only a gunter because you are trying to solve this quest to get money. That is why all of y'all are doing this. Y'all trying to get money. Y'all are not interested in this stuff just to sincerely be interested in this stuff. And I think that's the most annoying part. A lot of what I've heard about this book is that it's a love letter to the 80s. It's not a love letter to the 80s. A love letter to the 80s would have been this boy being thoroughly interested in it because he was thoroughly interested in it. He's only interested in it because he's trying to make money to get out of his situation. I think that's the most irritating part about this book, is that he's acting like a nerd boy, gatekeeping nerd culture, but he's not even gatekeeping it because it's something he likes and he's interested in it. He's gatekeeping it because he's trying to make money. I have one more thing I need to add. The dialogue. The dialogue in this book is just... it's written like how a person who's grown and hasn't been a teenager in a minute, how they think like teenagers talk. I'm laughing while reading the dialogue, but it's not because it's funny and like witty or like even parodying it. It's not like a stylistic choice. It's not like funny because it's meant to be funny. It's funny because it's so bad that it's funny. This could have been such a fun thing to do because it could have been cheesy, but like intentionally cheesy. This is what I mean by it's not a love letter to the 80s. It could have been cheesy dialogue for the sake of being cheesy. Like y'all are having serious conversations with this terribly written dialogue. Oh my gosh. What brought on this epiphany was chapter 3. I know, right? So early. The dialogue was terrible. The fact that it's basically just a bunch of video game manuals basically mashed together. It's just a bunch of random facts. Where's the story? The dialogue is not cheesy for the sake of being cheesy, and the evidence is the story surrounding it. If it was cheesy for the sake of being cheesy and like a reference at like 80s dialogue and stuff like that, the story would support it. The story would match the tone of the dialogue. It does not. The story is a dystopia, and the dialogue is literally just, oh, this is how I think teenagers talk. It's later on tonight. I'm on chapter 8. We're finally getting to the story after about like 5 chapters of this happened. I'm happy to finally be getting to the actual story. And now I'm a little bit intrigued, but if he messes this up, I'm gonna be super pissed off. Yeah, today is May 22nd. I finished Ready Player One last Friday. I powered through the last third of that book, which was about 17 chapters, because I was ready to be done. And I can admit when I'm wrong. It wasn't terrible like I thought it was gonna be, but it was average. I still stand on what I said about it though as I was reading it. It was 100% the equivalent of the nerd boy who you tell him you like something and he starts quizzing you on it, and if you don't know everything, he gets mad at you and claims you're not a true fan. That is literally what this book was. Them first 5 chapters, they were horrible, but once we got to the quest was intriguing enough for me to want to see what would happen. For Wade to have all this knowledge on 80s pop culture, he sure wasn't getting a lot of these clues. He sure was not getting a lot of these clues for him to be knowing all of this knowledge and stuff like this, for him to be looking down on other people. I'm like, the first gate, it took you 5 years to figure out, and you got it because a teacher said it in a lesson. The second clue, couldn't even figure it out because you disregarded what it was as not being important, and H literally had to help you get it. The third key, the crystal key, that's really the only one he really figured out on his own and like was able to get it like that. It was all right. It's not the worst thing I've read this year. In those 80s references, I did not like the way they were implemented, because it's like the reference would be in there and it'd be this long explanation, and it's like, just put the reference in there. If they get it, they get it. If they don't, they don't. Every time we hit a reference, I would just skim over it. Especially things I'd already know about. I don't need an explanation on them. Like things like a Rubik's Cube, Pac-Man, stuff like that. I don't need an explanation on stuff everybody knows about. It was average. It was okay. It's not the worst thing I've read this year. That honor still belongs to Falcon 7. Ready Player One goes in that camp of like least favorite books, but it's not the worst I've read. It's like right above Siri Who Am I and Falcon 7. And now I'm going to give it to my friend. I have no plans to read Ready Player 2, but we'll see, because I've heard Ready Player 2 is even worse than Ready Player 1, and Ready Player 1 was average to me. This man knows that I love to read books. He knows that I write books. I don't understand why he would try me like that. I gave it a 3. Wade got on my nerves. The references were so over explained. Kind of wish the references, they wouldn't have been like super explained. I kind of wish they had just kind of been like thrown in there, and if you got it, you got it. If you didn't, you did it. Because they could have been like Easter eggs, which is kind of like the whole point of the book, because they're looking for a big Easter egg basically. And I wish like the dialogue had kind of been written like cheesy like 80s dialogue, because think about it, this is a book that takes place in like 2043 about like a 80s resurgence during that time, and so wouldn't like the slang be reminiscent of like 80s slang, since that's what's popular at the moment. It wasn't the worst book I read, but it was definitely amongst the worst. The next book I read was Agatha Christie's Death on the Nile, and I'm not even gonna lie, I read this book to watch the movie that just came out. My mom was watching the movie, and so I was sitting there watching it, but I knew I had the book and I didn't want to be spoiled on the book. I left the room to go read the book, and then I went back and watched the movie. The movie pissed me off because the people who died in the movie are not the same people who died in the book. And it pissed me off because the people who died in the movie, some of them weren't even supposed to be in the movie in the first place because they weren't in the book. That pissed me off with the movie, but I did enjoy the book. I gave it a 5. It does definitely show its age, and it is definitely a book of its time. I enjoyed it. I gave it a 5. And then the next book I read was Their Eyes Were Watching God. This was a reread. It was my turn to choose our book for the book swap. So I chose Their Eyes Were Watching God because I've been trying to get Tati to read this book for years. And so that's what I chose for us to read in the month of May. I enjoyed it the first time I read it, and so this was a reread, and so I enjoyed it the second time. Once again, it's a 5-star book. I learned some new things reading it this time. I understood some things better, and we also watched the movie. It was my first time watching the movie. I'm not going to say too much on it because I want y'all to go watch the video when it comes out, but I did give it a 5. So then we get to the month of June. In the month of June, I read the rest of the God Don't Like Ugly series, which was God Ain't Blind, God Ain't Through Yet, and God Don't Make No Mistakes. This is where we come back to the first 3 books in the series, and I'm going to talk about the whole series right now. I do have a video on the last 3 books in the series, but I'm going to give y'all a quick little gist. God Don't Make No Mistakes is the worst book in the series, and it is the most disappointing conclusion to the series. That's all I'm saying on that. And God Don't Like Ugly is the best book in the series. I gave it a 4 in our video for the book swap, but I'm restoring it back to its 5-star rating. That is a 5-star book. That's the rating I gave it the first time I read it. That was my book swap pick for January, God Don't Like Ugly and God Still Don't Like Ugly, because I have been trying to get Tati to read God Don't Like Ugly since I read it. And so this was the perfect opportunity to get her to read it, and plus I could also take it as an opportunity to read God Still Don't Like Ugly, because I had it on my bookshelf but I hadn't read it yet. God Don't Like Ugly is back to its 5-star rating. That is the final verdict. It is a 5. It is the best book in the series. The main reason why is because God Don't Like Ugly, it don't have no story to fall back on. Like, it has to give you a full thought out story. It don't have nothing else to fall back on. The other books in the series, they do kind of fall back on previous books. Some fall back on them more heavily than others, but they all do kind of like fall back on previous books to tell their stories. Whereas God Don't Like Ugly, it don't have the opportunity to do that because it's the first book. And so that's why it's the best book. It's a 5. God Still Don't Like Ugly, I gave a 3.5, and that's leaning more towards a 3. It's one of the weaker books in the series because it leans so heavily on God Don't Like Ugly. God Don't Play, I gave a 3.5, leaning more towards a 4. And this goes with God Ain't Blind, which I gave a 4, because God Ain't Blind is basically the same storyline as God Don't Play, but it's told better and it works better than how it did in God Don't Play. God Ain't Through Yet, I gave a 3.5. Like, it had an interesting start, but it kind of just fizzled once you got to the end. And the reason why I feel like it does that is because it was setting up for more books in the series. So it was more like a setup book than it was its own book. So that's why I gave it a 3.5. And God Don't Make No Mistakes, I gave a very generous 3, even though it really should be a 2. But I gave it a generous 3 because it's not the worst book I read this year. Because I can't give it worse than Falcon 7 if Falcon 7 is the worst book I've read this year. It got a very generous 3, but it deserved a 2 because it is truly the worst book in the series. Another book I read in June was In My Father's House by Ernest J. Gaines. This was my pick for our book club, and I gave it a 4. It was enjoyable. I loved it. I loved reading it. I learned that this book was basically just the background to the original plot that Ernest J. Gaines wanted to write. Even though I appreciate and love the book for what it is, I do wish we had got that original plot too. But I did really enjoy this book. The next book I read was Fearless, which is the second book in the Lost Fleet series. I gave it a 5. I enjoyed it. I'm not going to say too much on it because I want you to go watch the video when it comes out. But I did give it a 5. I was kind of playing with it a little bit. I was kind of acting like I didn't want to read it. But when I finally did read it, I enjoyed it and I gave it a 5. The next book I read was Who's Afraid of a Large Black Man by Charles Barkley. This book was a nonfiction book about race. I thought it was going to be like his experience with race, but what it was him kind of like compiling a list of stories about race. I found this book in my grandparents' house, and the cover got me because I was interested, because it looked interesting, and I was like, well, what is this about? I gave it a 4. I agreed with some things said. I didn't agree with some things said. A lot of the things that Charles said I didn't really agree with. Sometimes he would push his experience as if it was the only experience that mattered, but I'm like, that's not how that works. I did like how he got like different people of different races to talk about race and not just black people, But what I will say is I wish we had got more perspectives like from the other side of the race conversation. And there was some perspectives that were taught that are like thank you acknowledgments, but their perspectives don't make it into the actual book. And I would have loved to got some of the perspectives, because I know some of them people would have had some things to say. Not necessarily defending racism, but like, you know, it's some people who like, this was my experience with racism, but this is how I overcame it, and this is why I fight racism. But there are some people who are like, this is my experience with racism, and this is how I overcame it, and this is why I believe racism really isn't a hindrance. I wish we got some of them perspectives as well. We didn't get no perspectives from them. I wish I got some perspectives from them just to see why they think that way. It would have helped round out the book, give it a more rounded experience. And the last book I read in June was Tumbling by Diane McKinney Whetstone. Tumbling was a 5-star book. I enjoyed this book. It was the book slot pick for me and Tati for the month of June, so we do have a video coming out on it, so I'm not gonna say too much on it, but just know I enjoyed this book. So that was 28 books that I read for this first half of the year. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, give it a like, a comment, and subscribe to my channel if you like my personality. If you really like me and you want to support me, I want to let y'all know that I do write books. I don't just read them. So if you want to be supportive and go buy one, I won't stop you. I'm not going to beg you to do it either. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.